Miniature model gaming. In miniature wargaming, players enact simulated battles using scale models called miniature models, which can be anywhere from 2 to 54 mm in height to represent warriors, vehicles, artillery, buildings, and terrain. These models are colloquially referred to as miniatures or minis. Miniature models are commonly made of metal, plastic, or paper. They are used to augment the visual aspects of a game and track position, facing, and line of sight of characters. Miniatures are typically painted and can be artfully sculpted, making them collectible in their own right. Pre-painted plastic figures, such as Clix miniatures produced by WizKids and unpainted plastic figures for Warhammer by Games Workshop, have become popular. The hobby of painting, collecting, and playing with miniatures originated with toy soldiers, though the latter were generally sold pre-painted. Materials. Miniature models are derived from toy soldiers, which were constructed of a variety of materials. These toy figures came to be mass-produced from tin in late 1700s Germany, where they were called Soldaten tin soldiers. These early figures were flat models commonly called flats, and became quite common in Western Europe. By the mid-1800s, manufacturers in several countries were producing 3D miniatures of tin and lead alloys, commonly called white metal. In the 20th century, miniatures would also be manufactured from plastic and composite materials. In 1993, the New York legislature introduced a bill outlawing lead in miniatures, citing public health concerns. Many miniature manufacturers, anticipating that other states would also impose bans, began making figures with lead-free alloys, often at increased prices. After months of debate and protest by miniature manufacturers and enthusiasts, New York Governor Mario Cuomo signed a bill which exempted miniatures from the state's public health law. Despite this, most American manufacturers continue to use non-lead alloys. Some wargames use box miniatures, consisting of cardstock folded into simple cuboids with representative art printed on the outside. Other games use twad cardboard miniatures that are either held in a base or folded into a triangular tent. Scales. Historically, the size of miniatures was described in various different systems of measurement, most commonly in metric and English units. The most common miniatures were the 54 mm European miniatures and the 2:1/4 English models, which are commonly considered to be 1/32 scale. Early wargames such as H.G. Wells' Little Wars used these commonly available miniatures. With metrication in the United Kingdom, United States manufacturers began to use the metric system to describe miniatures, as opposed to the previously popular customary units, so that their tabletop wargaming models would be compatible. The scale of a figure is often described in millimeters. For example, one of the most common scales is 28 millimeters. While a model may be described as 28 mm, the actual height of the model may be different. This is because of a number of factors such as manufacturer, model proportion, method of measuring the model's pose, and what sort of man the model is meant to represent. A manufacturer might advertise its figures as 28 mm, but their products may be over 30 mm tall. Manufacturers' use of scale is not uniform and can deviate by as much as 30%. Some manufacturers measure figure height from the feet to the eyes rather than the top of a head. Therefore, a figure that is 30 mm to the top of its head could be considered to be 28 miniature. A further complication is differing interpretations of body proportions. Many gaming figures are unrealistically bulky for their height, with oversized feet, heads, hands, wrists, and weapons. Figurines with these exaggerated features are often referred to as heroic scale. Some of these exaggerations began as concessions to the limitations of primitive mold-making and sculpting techniques, but they have evolved into stylistic conventions. Figures are commonly used with a variety of scales. In 28 mm scale, short characters such as dwarves, hobbits, and goblins might be represented by figures in the 15 to 20 mm range, while taller characters like ogres, trolls, and dragons would use 30 mm or larger figures. It is not uncommon for there to be a mismatch between the game's scale and miniature size. Chainmail used a scale of 1/360 appropriate to 5 mm miniatures, but was played with 30 mm miniatures, and the conceit that each figure represented 20 men. In many games there is a definite scale specified for the square grid that the game is played upon. One of the most common is 1 inch represents 5 feet. This specifies an exact scale of 1/60. That implies that a 28 mm tall figurine represents a person, which is a reasonable number for a modern 50th percentile male C human height. Another popular scale is 1/72 or 1 inch equals 6 foot, which uses 20 mm to 25 mm miniatures. It is mostly used for historical gaming, in part due to a wide selection of 1/72 scale models. Figures of 15mm, 20mm, 25mm, 28mm, 30mm, 32mm, and 35mm are the most common for role-playing and tabletop games. Smaller figures of 2mm, 6mm, 10mm, 15mm, and 20mm are used for mass combat wargames. Large sizes such as 40mm and 54mm were once popular with wargamers in the past and are still used by painters and collectors. While the large miniatures have become popular again since the late 20th century, they are not as popular as the small sizes. In the table below, figure height alone excluding base thickness is the feature from which approximate scale is calculated. Figure height scale foot scale ratio comments 2mm approximately 0.333mm approximately 1/914 useful for gaming in tight spaces or representing large forces. Popular scale for Victorian science fiction VSF games. 3mm approximately 0.508mm approximately 1/600 as with 2mm figures, useful for gaming in tight spaces or representing large forces. Primarily used for World War Roman II and modern land and air games. Sometimes referred to as picoscale. 5.92mm approximately 0.987mm 1/300 the NATO/EU standard scale for sandtable wargames involving micro-armor. Closely related to 1/285 scale and generalized is 6mm figure scale. 6.2mm approximately 1.33mm 1/285 the US standard for large-scale historical armor battles involving micro-armor. Also popular in other genres, such as ancient, fantasy, and sci-fi. Closely related to 1/300 scale. 8.09.14mm approximately 1.524mm 1/200 scale 1/182 scale the standard for all 1970-1980 large-scale display plastic aircraft, a large majority of die-cast aircraft, and science fiction plastic kits. Also popular in other genres such as ancient, fantasy, and sci-fi. 1 scale inch is equivalent to approximately 1/200 of an inch, 0.5 inches and 25.4 millimeters. 1 scale foot is equivalent to approximately 12/200 of an inch, 0.6 inches and 1.524 millimeters. 1 scale yard is equivalent to approximately 1/36 of an inch, 0.18 inches and 4.572 millimeters. Figure scale is 8mm generally squared after 1/160 1/200 scale 10mm approximately 1.667mm approximately 1.9mm 1/160 approximately 1/182 a newer scale, growing in popularity especially for World War Roman II and science fiction gaming, but increasingly for historical games as well. Roughly equal to North scale railroad trains. Notable manufacturers include Pendraker Miniatures, New Lines, Irregular Miniatures, Magister Millatum, Steve Barber, Callistra, Minifix UK, Old Glory, and Games Workshop's Warmaster line of miniatures. Often measured as eye height, giving ~160 for 10mm scale, and figures being 10-12mm tall overall. 12mm 2mm approximately 1/152 a newer scale, growing in popularity, closely related to 10mm. Roughly equal to 1/144 scale and North scale model mini armor. 15mm approximately 3mm approximately 1/100 the most popular scale used for historical wargames set in the modern era, such as Flames of War or Axis and Allies miniatures. Also widely used in ancient era wargaming, such as De Bellis Multitudines, De Bellis and De Quatotis, and Fields of Glory. Seldom used for RPGs. Range is roughly from 1/100 scale to 1/122 scale. This is TT scale in miniature railroading. 18mm approximately 3.5mm approximately 1/87 heroic 15mm, such as the Napoleon at War range. Roughly HO scale. 20mm approximately 4mm approximately 1/76 1/72 highly popular for World War Roman II wargaming, as the figures are of roughly the same scale as our model railways. Seldom used for RPGs. FX made a considerable range of figures in the scale. Historically, they were labelled on the box as HO and OO scale but are now described as 1/76 or 1/72 scale. 25/28mm approximately 4.17mm approximately 1/64 the most common size of miniatures, as it is used by Games Workshop. While original 25mm figures matched 1/76 models 4mm scale or 0 gauge, they developed wide upwards variation in figure height. True 28mm figures are close to 1/64 models S scale, but may appear larger due to bulky sculpting and thick bases. 30mm 5mm approximately 1/61.0 common for Preminus 1000, 970s wargaming figures. Modern minis may be up to 35 mm. Close to SAR scale model railroads. 32 mm approximately 5.33 mm approximately 157.2 idiosyncratic to mythical miniatures. Genuine 32 mm, 35 mm approximately 5.83 mm approximately 152.3 genuine 30 mm, 40 mm approximately 7 mm approximately 143 older figures from the 60s tend to be thinner and sometimes shorter than new metal ones. Close to OO scale model railroads. 54 mm 9.6 mm approximately 132 collectible figures. Historical these were considered to be 132 or 3/8 to the foot models. Plastic dollar store army men are often sold at this scale. Most new plastic 54 mm figures are 1/32 and these are the most common ones to be used for wargaming. Scales smaller still are used when the game involves large vehicles such as starships or battleships. For instance, Axis and Allies naval miniatures. War at sea uses 1/1800 scale and scales down to 1/6000 are seen. There is no equivalent mm number for these scales as individual figures would be nearly microscopic and are not used as such in the games. Miniature figure scaled chart. The following chart provides a numerical relationship between model scale and multiple figurine scales based on a Platonic idea of the height of a human being humanoid. The meaning of 15 mm, for example, is therefore dependent on a defined reference height. Thus 15 mm in the context of a dwarven world where the reference humanoid is 60 inches tall is not equivalent to 15 mm in the context of an NBA model where the reference humanoid is 2 meters tall. Both models can be described as 15 mm, but the real-world sizes depend on the size of the reference humanoid. In practice, the reference humanoid is generally assumed to be the idea of the average height of the human male within a 6-inch interval between 5.5 feet and 6.0 feet, unless otherwise indicated by the designer. Average human height is heavily dependent on the population measured within a geographical region and historical era. 1260, 66, 72, 1 in 1 model inch humanoid scale meters, feet, inches, centimeters, 10.254, 0.833, 2.54, 12, 0.3048, 112, 30.48, 24, 0.6096, 224, 60.96, 36, 0.9000, 144, 336, 91.44, 48, 1.2192, 448, 121.92, 61.524, 560, 152.4, 72, 1.8000, 288, 672, 182.88, 84, 2.13, 36, 784, 213.36, 96, 2.4000, 384, 896, 243.84, 182.7000, 432, 9, 180, 274.32, 123.48, M 123, 104.8, 144, 3.6000, 576, 12, 144, 365.76, 184.572, 15, 184, 157.22, 146.96, 2246, 109.6, 307.62, 25, 300, 762, 369.144, 3369, 114.4, 480, 12.192, 44, 112, 19.2, 615.24, 56, 600, 1524, 720, 18.288, 6720, 1828.8, 840, 21.336, 7840, 2133.6, 922.86, 75, 922, 86, 960, 24.384, 8960, 24, 38.4, 10, 80, 27.4, 132, 90, 10, 80, 27, 43.2, 1230.48, 112, 100, 3048, 1840, 45.72, 150, 1800, 4000, 572, 24, 160.96, 224, 6096. Painting. Many role-playing gamers and wargamers paint their miniatures to differentiate characters or units on a gaming surface terrain, battle mat, or an adorned tabletop. Fantasy, role-playing, miniatures, and wargaming conventions sometimes feature miniature painting competitions, such as Games Workshop's Golden Demon Contest. There are also many painting competitions on the internet. Manufacture. There are two basic methods of manufacturing figures: centrifugal/gravity casting and plastic injection casting. Most metal and resin figures are made through spin casting. Larger resin models, like buildings and vehicles, are sometimes gravity cast, which is a slower process. To gravity cast, a sculptor develops a master figure, which is then used to create rubber master and production molds. The production molds are used to cast the final commercial figures. Polyethylene and polystyrene figures are made by injection molding. A machine heats plastic and injects it under high pressure into a steel mold. This is an expensive process. It is only cost-effective when manufacturing large amounts of figures, since the quantity renders the cost per cast minimal. Many miniatures companies do not produce their figures themselves, but leave the manufacturing to specialized casting companies or miniatures companies that have casting facilities. Sculpting. Most miniatures are hand-sculpted using two-component epoxy putties in the same size as a final figure. The components of the putty are mixed together to create a sculpting compound that hardens over 48 hours. Some common brands include Polymerix, Niedertype, Blueback/Yellow, also known as Green Stuff and Duro in Europe, Milliput I&B, Magic Sculpt, and Craftworks Procreate. Until recently, sculptors avoided polymer clays as they cannot withstand the traditional mold-making process. Modern techniques using RTV silicone and softer quality rubbers have made it possible to use weaker materials, so the polymer clay masters have become more common. Fumo clay is popular, though due to the individual properties of certain colors, only a limited selection of colors is used. Masters for plastic miniatures are often made in a larger scale, often 3 times the required size. The master is measured with a probe linked to a pantograph that reduces the measurements to the correct size and drives the cutter that makes the molds. A more recent development is the use of digital 3D models made by computer artists. These digital models create a physical model for mold making using rapid prototyping techniques. Alternatively, they can be used directly to drive a computer numerical control machine that cuts the steel mold. They can also simply skip molding steps and directly produce miniatures from 3D models. Miniatures in Dungeons & Dragons. Originally, Dungeons & Dragons was an evolution of the chainmail medieval miniatures game, with the distinction that each player controlled a single figure and had a wider variety of actions available. The original D&D box set brought the subtitle, Rules for Fantastic Miniature Wargames Campaigns playable with paper and pencil and miniature figures. However, Dungeons & Dragons did not require miniatures, referring to them as early aesthetically pleasing. Advanced Dungeons & Dragons likewise included a relatively short section describing miniature use, in conjunction with the official AD&D miniatures being produced at the time. As the game developed, miniatures became more of an optional add-on. The AD&D 2nd edition accessory player's option, Combat and Tactics, introduced a more elaborate grid-based combat system that emphasized the use of miniatures. A streamlined version of some of these concepts appeared in D&D 3rd edition. Although not strictly necessary, the 4th edition of the game assumes the use of miniatures, and many game mechanics refer explicitly to the combat grid. In addition to reducing ambiguity about the size and position of characters, this allows the game to specify rules for reach, threatened areas, and movement rates. The 5th edition de-emphasized these mechanics and returned the use of miniatures to mostly optional. Traditionally, figures were made of alloys, but pre-painted, collectible plastic miniatures have grown in popularity, including officially licensed D&D miniatures. In 2003, Wizards of the Coast produced the Dungeons & Dragons miniatures game as a standalone game that also served as the game's official line of miniatures. The game was discontinued as a standalone in 2011, but miniatures continued to be produced for use with the role-playing game. Since 2014, WizKids has held the license to produce official D&D miniatures. 2D miniatures. Some games feature miniatures printed on cardboard or cardstock, and some companies have published such miniatures to be used in place of miniature models. Steve Jackson Games published the Cardboard Heroes line, and included cardstock miniatures in Steve Jackson's Man-to-Man and then in the GURPS Basic set and supplements such as GURPS Auto Duel. Sargonians was another early line of cardboard miniatures. The Dungeons & Dragons basic game included cardstock miniatures in supplements and adventures such as The Kidnapping of Princess Irelina, The Revenge of Rusak, The Veiled Society, and The Gem and the Staff. Marvel Superheroes by TSR included cardstock miniatures, and was supplemented by adventure fold-up figures and more in Pit of the Viper. Other games that feature such 2D miniatures include Star Patrol, Wingworld, Dragon Warrior, Judge Dredd, the role-playing game Twerps, and Space, 1889.